Welcome this morning or evening as it is where you are. And thank you, Alan, Patrick, and Miles for joining us for this get-together roundup for the Iwama dialogues. And so just to make a small introduction for those of you who have seen the individual interviews, if everybody could turn off their microphones to start with, and then we let you in afterwards. So really, all these dialogues that we've been having together is about really our life story, and for all of us, the Iwama years were very important to us in our Aikido development and also in our beginning spiritual understanding and evolution of, and our further interest in that field in relationship to Aikido. And we all done very different things. We follow different paths and we follow different teachings and teachers. But we have always been able to meet and communicate in a wonderful way about these topics that are really close to the heart, really the deepest, most questions that any one of us can really entertain about what is life and what is my life all about. And also in relationship to what we are doing now, teaching Aikido and living our lives. So I don't really know what we're gonna talk about today, but I do want to keep it with that frame of mind that what we are doing is contained with a bigger whole, and we want to look at it in the deepest, most sense of what we would then maybe call spirit or being. And so I would like to welcome Alan Roberts from New Zealand, Miles Kessler, who lives now in Tel Aviv, Israel, and Patrick Cassidy, who lives in Switzerland since many years. So welcome. Why don't you unmute yourself and we can join in. And just to say to everybody else, we're going to do about 35 minutes here, and then we're going to have a 10-minute break, and then we're going to come back for another 40 minutes where we invite questions from all of you. But until then, would you just leave us dialogue and get warm and get going, and then we let you in the second half. Great, thank you.
And just wanted to start off with saying thank you, Bjorn, for organizing this. It's a nice way to reconnect and to open up some of the experience of what happened in Iwama in a fresh way. So I really appreciate your work for making this happen.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I guess I'll jump in first. It's really great. To tell you the truth, I haven't spoken or seen Alan for quite some time. I don't know how many years has it been. It's been, I think we had a telephone call way back, maybe 10 years ago or 12 years ago.
5 years ago, maybe.
Yeah,
No, more recent. So maybe, yeah, it might be 20 years though. Yeah.
So it's really wonderful to see Alan and Miles. I obviously, with Miles and Bjorn, I have much more stronger contact, but there is something about what I'm noticing right now as we just jumped on the call just a few minutes ago, with Alan specifically, that there's this timeless quality, there's this immediate connection that doesn't have anything to do with, oh wow, it's been like 20 years, blah 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 blah. I mean, there are details in our lives which we'd like to catch up on, and I suspect we will make some time for that. But I just recognized immediately, wow, just there's something about the connection that occurred in Japan that broaches or somehow is not constrained in time as normal relationships often do, in the sense that after 20 years of not seeing a person, you really are meeting the person completely as a new person. So I just wanted to comment on that, and it touched me in a very positive way, and I'm very happy to experience that. It's nice to reconnect with Alan in that way.
Thank you. Yeah, Yeah, same. I definitely had that feeling. So
Yeah. I think that, since nobody's going to jump in, I'll continue. And I think that has something to do with the quality of the life that we were living in Japan, in a certain sense of that we were connecting with something that was fundamental for us, and we were doing it in community. And being able to devote one's life to something that they love, and to do it with people, other people who are devoting their lives in the same fashion, and living really, it wasn't anything radically extraordinary about buying an airline ticket and living in a foreign country and practicing. I mean, there is something really beautiful about it and extraordinary about it, but I don't feel that I was extraordinary in doing so. I just felt lucky in doing that and taking the opportunity to do that. And there was something about this kind of alchemical mix on that particular time which enabled us to do that based on so many other factors that just happened to fall into place at the same time. Just the quality of the people there, the dojo and Saito Sensei's willingness as a Japanese teacher to welcome people into the dojo and to allow people from outside of Japan to come and stay and to train, and his willingness to teach. But then there was this kind of cohesive group that showed up at that time that lived both in the dojo but external to the dojo in Iwama, that created a support network and literally I would call it a sangha, a conscious community that was devoted to supporting each other as we all followed our paths with a heart. And we all, when I say that, is that we were all devoted to what we were doing based on the fact that we loved it. It wasn't based on some form of later reward or some form of decisions made out of fear or ambition. It was something that we did because we loved it. And that had a huge impact, I think, on the nature of how we connected. And that, I think, has a lot to do with the experience that I'm having now, and the sense of connecting with Alan after a long period of time and feeling like no time has passed. And that for me is something that is quite beautiful to see right here and right now.
I think it was just an interesting thing. I mean, certainly that feeling of reconnection, but also kind of the thing of, because if you just describe what we went through in Iwama, it does sound like a lot of people's fantasies. In fact, Michael was talking today about how he'll talk to people who are sort of going, oh, it's like, I'd love to go to Japan and devote myself to, and he hears it so often now that he has a rather quiet sort of stop to it where he says, yeah, that's right, I lived your dream. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And sure. which is maybe a little bit of a slap, but I think that's the for me personally, at least, it wasn't talent or anything special about me. I was just made a decision to go there, and then things were kind of simple once I was there. It was very, in a lot of ways, much easier than a lot of other parts of my life, which are quite complex. And I think it was a real blessing to have those 4 years in Iwama. But no great achievement. And then within that, although I think I sort of sat a little bit to the side of maybe the kind of the group. I was a bit younger and sort of had my own things going on, but I think in the most important things in my time there, I was really supported by you guys. So, thank you very much for that. And, I really appreciate that. And I certainly feel that connection of, no time passing, really. So, yeah.
Shall I jump in now?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I love what you guys said. Maybe just as an opening, first I want to thank Bjorn for setting up this series. When he first broached the idea, I thought, oh yeah, that sounds kind of cool. But I have to tell you, Bjorn, I have thoroughly enjoyed this. I loved our session, and I watched Patrick's session. I watched Alan's session, and it was just such a, talk about that timeless. It was such a beautiful experience to kind of relive the eternal living experience, the experience that always was there, always is there, always will be, because we were actually coming into contact with something that's quite universal, I think, which goes to what Alan was saying about living the dream. Well, actually, we were just we had the perfect conditions to be able to commit our lives to a very in a way narrow, because life was very simple there, but a very narrow and deep path. And it was transformational, and it was just like reliving, in a way, not even reliving, it was reaffirming what's alive in me through listening to Bjorn and Patrick and Alan. I did listen a little bit to the other guest you had. Forgive me, I don't remember his name, but he's actually, it's a guy living in Iwama now, which was interesting for me, but it wasn't the same. Sorry, what's his name?
Carl Thompson.
Right, yeah. Yeah, but since we never met, and it was it's a different era now. I mean, it was quite, what's going on there now is quite different than it was the days that we were there. Yeah, so basically, I agree with everything that you guys said. Meeting again, and last time I saw Alan was in probably 2000 or 99 or something like that in New Zealand. I was passing through Auckland for about a week, and we did the training with Peter Ralston together. And yeah, it was like yesterday. It was really, and here we are again. And that's the beautiful testament to the fellowship that we created, of course. But even the art of Aikido, if we were to grab each other right now, we would go, yeah, just like yesterday, I'm sure. So thank you, Bjorn, for putting this together. It's really wonderful.
No, it's something in one way, I've been harboring this idea for a long time. And long before Zoom was around, and long before we had this pandemic. But it's suddenly the Zoom thing that really Miles and Patrick put me on to realize the potential in it. And Miles has been running with it for many years, and it's been fantastic to see what Miles has been doing and participate to some degree. But it's been wonderful. So I thought I'd take that opportunity to reflect upon my life, but our life, your lives, passing through Iwama. Because for me, that was it was a time out. That was a time out to leave my like Alan said, maybe more confused lives back home, where there was so much ingrained conditioning, part of what one was supposed to be. And Japan and Iwama became time for freedom, time to do time to think, time to contemplate, time to reflect. And meeting up with you guys was just wonderful, because suddenly, and I remember, because I think I befriended you, Patrick, first, and we spoke about this already, but just connecting on the same kind of thoughts about what we want to do, what we are interested in, and what we want to pursue. And for me, it was just in the beginning days. So I felt very fresh, but I felt also very blessed to have that time in Japan, because and Iwama and Saito Sensei provided that incredible, beautiful spot to be in and to practice. So.
Yeah. I think, as you're speaking, Bjorn, what comes to my mind and shows up, and I don't want to speak for everybody, but I suspect it's similar in some ways, is that Japan was kind of an entry point in actually deciding to live a life in a different way. That because from the point that I left the United States, I wasn't necessarily leaving just the US, I was leaving the conditioned way that life was expected to unfold. Going to school, getting a job, getting married, blah, 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 and the whole thing that unfolds along those lines. And when I left for Japan, the first visit was kind of like, okay, let's give it a test. And then 6 months later, I came back and I committed to a long term. And that was really leaving my life behind And I think from that point until now, I haven't gone back. And I know I think that's true for you, Bjorn, and Miles, and I suspect it's true for Alan as well, is that sense that we continue to use that compass of living our lives based on something else other than the fundamental kind of conditioned, or the conditioned way we've been educated on how to progress in life. And that, I think for that reason, Japan played a huge part in giving me a shift in my compass, or the shift in the way my life unfolded and continues to unfold. And that's been really a gift that, in a certain way, I feel grateful to Saito Sensei for creating that space that allowed that to happen. Does that make sense what I'm saying, Bjorn? Do you?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm totally agreeing with you. And I was just thinking about, you know, the training that we did daily training, daily misogi, daily practice, daily physical workout. It's so, I mean, it's so healthy. I mean, every day, even now, I'm you know, and thanks to Zoom, I'm working out every day, which is, you know, and back then we practiced every day. And we usually had a day off on Monday, but so we were just looking somewhere else where we could train on the Monday. So it's like we couldn't get enough of it. And I remember also call it, you know, just this is your daily misogi. This is your daily purification. And we spent the time there. And really, we weren't there with a time limit. I don't think any one of us. We left when our heart said, okay, we had enough, we are moving on. I think what do you think about that? That's my feeling.
Totally. Well, I can speak for myself. It was, my belly was full, and I guess I'm still digesting experience, but my belly was full, and I was completely fulfilled with what I had went there for and what I had somehow gained. And I felt that I could leave. It was interesting for me. I felt like I never wanted to leave. I mean, I had the conditions where I could stay. I had no obligations or nothing pulling me away. So I felt I didn't want to leave Japan until, for the first few years, I said, if I leave now, I can see my practice going like this. It's like it's just going one direction, because we're training pretty intensively daily. And if I leave now, I can see my practice kind of, you know, either plateauing or something like that. And I said, I didn't want to leave until I felt like I would be satisfied with that. And it took about, again, this is personal for me. I'm not suggesting it should be this way for everybody, but for me, it took about 5 years before I felt that. And then it was a few more years that I was there after that, just kind of, you know, integrating. And those extra years, I'm actually happy, because it was a lot of undoing the conditioning, which was kind of good up to a certain point. But after that point, it became baggage. And the last 3 years was still developing and training my Aikido, but also working out a lot of the baggage that I had picked up while I was there as well. So there's two sides to everything, you know. What did I just hear something yesterday? Whenever something strong comes into existence in the universe, it also has a shadow. And not to change the conversation to the shadow, but that was, you know, like the gaijin who becomes more Japanese than the Japanese. Alan, you know what I'm talking about. Patrick, you know what I'm talking about. Bjorn, you know what I'm talking about. There was a lot of undoing of that, and I was happy to have started that while I was in Japan, actually. But I don't want to shift, unless you want to. I don't want to shift the conversation to that right now.
I think what you're saying, Miles, was good, and as well, Bjorn, in the sense that we stayed until something got recognized in our system. For me, it was a sense of like not needing to try to carry the information in my head anymore. It was in my bones in a certain sense.
Right.
And that I had digested it in a certain. I'd stayed for 3 years, and then I took a break for a year. I'd gone to India and taught for a while, and I realized that although I had a lot of skills in my hands, they were like, I was having to kind of constantly keep it going in order to keep it alive, and it wasn't fully digested. And that's when I came back for another almost 4 years. And that sense of just wanting to stay until I felt like I had digested the material and it had become part of my part of my cellular structure, and I didn't have to go around constantly trying to remember things, that it just was there and available. And that's, for me, that was a desire or a certain sense of direction that that helped me kind of understand how long to stay.
I think also.
Alan? I think Alan was going to say something.
Yeah.
No, actually, I wasn't. I was just considering whether I had anything to add to that. And I think maybe I was in a slightly different situation. So, I mean, I certainly, my last 6 months or so in Japan, I really think I was done, and I felt done. But I wasn't. It wasn't like I'm done because I've got everything here. It's like, no, I'm done with this thing. So now I'm not. Now I'm sort of running my wheels or whatever. And there's that personal feeling, and then the way that plays out in conditions around me as well. So. And when I left, I was like, oh, okay, I'm done with that kind of thing. So I didn't come back to New Zealand. Certainly didn't come back thinking to teach or even necessarily to practice. So to begin with, I had a look at what was around as far as Aikido went. And it's like, oh, if that's what it is, it's like I'm I'm not interested. And I think a lot of that was not just a different style of Aikido, but it's like, well, this isn't the experience for me of practicing. And I think that was because I was out of that community.
You remember when you went to Thailand and did kickboxing for a while?
Yeah. I mean, I spent about a year where I was traveling, so India and Thailand and different things. Yeah, and then probably that would have been enough then. I'd done 3 years in Japan. I did a year traveling, and then I came back and I sort of did a year. And that year was, it was just, certainly the last 6 months of that year was enough. That was time to go. So I'm not really sure what exactly I was feeling about coming back here. I mean, I was sort of ready for the next thing. And ended up teaching by accident. There's a bit of a story there of, I'll say I was tricked into teaching. And I'll tell you how I was into teaching. So
it was meant to be, Alan. It was meant to be.
I went to a class, and I didn't enjoy the class very much. But one of the guys in the class said, "Oh, wow, what's this? Who are you? What is this thing?" And I said, "Oh, as briefly as I could, where I'd been." I said, "Oh, I like this. Are you teaching somewhere?" I said, "No, I'm not teaching somewhere." He says, "Well, would you teach?" And no, look, I'd need mats and like a place, and And he says, "Well, if you had mats and a place, would you teach?" I said, "Oh, yeah." So
right.
A week later, the guy gives me a phone call and he says, "Hey, I got mats and a place."
That's so awesome. That's so
go.
I mean, they saw you, and they you were just in a different place, and they appreciated it, and they in a way presented it to you. That's so beautiful.
That's great.
It's really cool.
Yeah, and I think and the thing that was good for me was that then allowed me to have some sort of place. So which is I didn't have to fit into something. I started to create something, which I never would never have set out to do. So I'm really in debt to him for kicking things off. So, but yeah, I don't know. It's hard for me actually to remember exactly where I was when I left Iwama. It's like, definitely done with that. But then on the other hand, I continued to have a very long relationship with Japan. So because I married a Japanese woman and I was traveling back, and Japanese in-laws and stuff, and I've been back to Iwama, you know, now with its new kind of atmosphere that's there. So
atmosphere.
yeah, it's, you know, of course it's a different place.
Sure.
I mean, it's beautiful. It's, you know, like, you know, the doors have paper in them. the toilet's glass. It's just, you know, it's, you know, all of the you know, wiring is actually probably correct and
Oh yeah.
You know, in proper conduits and everything. So yeah, but you know, it's a different place. That's a weird experience. That's like going home to your grandparents after you know, after your uncles have taken over the place, and it's definitely the same place, but you know,
Right. No.
just
No. Just on that note, I went back just a few years ago for a brief visit, and the place is wonderful. It's still Åsensej's place, and I came back right after the earthquake and they had repaired the place because it had been slightly damaged. But the spirit and the feeling of Iwama, of the dojo, of Åsensej's place it's just absolutely wonderful. Now the teaching routine is completely different, and the conditions for the uchideshi is different because there's not a resident teacher, but a wonderful place that, you know, anyone who wants to go should go. It's just absolutely wonderful. But I want to draw it back a little bit because by the time, and I think this is true for you too, Alan, because once we left and we were ready to move on, we all did some very important research and on continuous studies that more or less maybe had begun during our Iwama days. But suddenly, even if Iwama was a starting point for, at least for me, or it was part of my beginning, it was really when, almost like leaving Iwama, it was like, I don't know where to go, what to do, because like you, I wasn't going home to teach. I was sort of like, wow, now I'm really cut loose. I have nothing I can do, because in one way, Iwama was a routine. We had a schedule. We knew what we were doing, and it was wonderful. But now after—
Oh, and also we were regulated. We weren't allowed to work outside of the structure, the cultural frame or the dojo rules. We were kind of like, in a way, caged animals, and we did great within that frame, but we weren't allowed to express and explore. So once we got out, it really took off, like you were saying.
And I think we touched upon that in our individual interviews, but not just the spiritual pursuit, but also our martial pursuit or our Aikido pursuit. Because Alan, I know that you took on Peter Ralston, and I know that we were all came across Peter Ralston's book, Principles of Effortless Power, in Iwama. And me, for one, I was like, after reading that book, I was like on cloud 9 for 10 days. I was walking on air. But I think that book touched me because he described a perspective. He described his own experience from a spiritual retreat and his own enlightenment experiences that completely infused his art, his martial art. And I think that was I think we all were, in one way or another, we were all touched by him, besides all the other things that were going on for us. But I remember, especially for you, Alan, you were the one who took that on seriously and took that into account. And I know that you're not saying that you're teaching anything of his ontological teachings, but I know in my heart that you are very close to that in your own understanding. And I was wondering, because we spent some time in India together, but and Patrick, we spent some time in India, and Miles, you did all your years in Burma. So all this interest to the consciousness aspect of our being and to pursuing that I think for all of us took on it was like the next chapter. That's like, now we can really, maybe not, I don't know about you, Patrick, but you can say this yourself, but I think it took on a chapter for me And I think for all of us to where we could explore that in a very one-pointed way. And even Alan, because I was wondering about this, because I know you went to Peter Olson and you gained all of his skill, but you must have also been influenced by his thought.
Sure. Yeah.
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 So,
Yeah. I mean,
Just, can I just a quick sorry, Alan, just a quick time check. We've got about 6 minutes left, so Bjorn, you might want to keep an eye on that.
And Bjorn, we have somebody who's got their mic open. Maybe
yes, I managed just mute it right now. Sorry,
Alan.
Oh, that's right. I mean, just really quickly, as far as Peter goes, I mean, certainly his own interest is far more in consciousness than in martial arts. So, I mean, if you look at his work, he'll say he started in martial arts and began consciousness work in order to augment that, and then it flipped. So, I mean, certainly his perspective on things is that without those consciousness shifts, you're not going to have the skills that he demonstrates. So,
can I just interrupt for a second? So we will close this in 5 minutes, but when we get back after 10 minutes, I would like to continue this conversation a little bit longer. So Patrick and Miles and Alan continue this point about what happened once we kind of left Iwama and took on something more. Go on, Alan.
Okay. I don't know if I've got much to add to that, except that, yeah, I mean, Peter's work today, I think, is much more in consciousness work than in martial work. So, and he's got some really powerful tools in there. I'm not interested in being a communicator of that because I don't want the responsibility of it. I mean, that's kind of my position on it. It's you know, I think that's a very large responsibility when you start giving people guidance with, I guess, how they experience life, you know, so yeah, with consciousness, and I don't want that responsibility. So so that's kind of my position on it. And I mean, you know, certainly while I was an apprentice with him, we were doing a lot of consciousness work as well as a lot of martial work. I mean, we were doing a lot of work. There was something like, we were doing just, I mean, just physically, I think I was doing 9 or 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. So, and then, you know, contemplation work on top. So it was, you know, made Iwama look like a doddle, especially when you're 40 and not 20. So it's really a difference. Yeah. Yeah. So I guess that's my position. There's really powerful work there.
I was more interested in your kind of development, regardless of how that would affect other people, because for sure it will inadvertently affect other people just by you being you.
I don't know what to say. So yeah. What to say about that?
I don't know. Maybe I can jump in, Alan, because I feel like this is a question I would direct towards you, and I had this issue with, I think, and obviously to Miles as well, in relationship to cultivating, let's say, martial skill or the capacity to function in that domain of Aikido and whatever other arts we were practicing at that time. And the insight or the revelation that comes with meditation, contemplation, and the work that is done in the world of inquiry, and in a way they're not separate, but I always found that engaging in consciousness work or meditation as a way to improve my Aikido was a dead end street.
Yeah.
Because you're taking something which is radically bigger than anything the mind can hold on to, and you're applying it to the desires of the ego, or you know, the desire for power. And I asked Peter this, and I said, you know, don't you find that to be a challenge? Because if you're working in the ontological area as a way to improve your skills in the physical realm, don't you find yourself, kind of tying something really big into something quite small? And he says, I don't worry about it. And I said,
Yeah.
well, and for me, that was a concern that I immediately saw in engagement, and realized for me that was really important that I keep those two separate, so that whatever, if the insight was going to fundamentally have an impact on the movement of life, and that include my martial work, but included everything, and whatever happened in the Aikido was just a bonus based on the shift in consciousness that whatever occurred in the
hold that thought, Patrick. Let's continue this after the break. If you come back to our private meeting, and you guys, all of you else, have a coffee, have a tea, be back on the same ID and the same password in 10 minutes, and we see you then. Thank you so much, guys. See you soon.
Thank you. See you.
Okay, great. Welcome back, everybody. The people are coming in, but we might as well start because time is running. And great. I think who had the word when we left off? Alan.
Your mic's closed, Alan.
Just in answer to Patrick's question, I think, I think Peter would argue that the consciousness is not, consciousness is just consciousness. It's not for the purpose of being skillful, but that being skillful is aided if you're clearer about what's going on. So I think he would certainly say that the martial arts are the vehicle. Yeah.
I agree with that.
Follow that up quickly for myself. It's like I don't think of Aikido as a spiritual pursuit any more than, I don't know, washing the dishes might be or doing tea. I think tea's a fantastic example of how you can take something that's thoroughly mundane and just use it as a vehicle. But there's nothing spiritual in tea. There's nothing spiritual in martial arts, or innately, any more than there is in anything else. So yeah.
I think there's a whole subject of conversation around that in terms of what inherently I think the perspective of Aikido is. And for me, I think inherently the perspective of Aikido has a spiritual component to it, in the movement from an I to a we, and the recognition of how to resolve conflict from a we perspective rather than from an I perspective. For me, that's inherently a spiritual domain, and that wasn't necessarily the component of our training in Iwama. But I think within the perspective of Aikido, it does exist, and that was always a difficult thing.
I think it was a component. Sorry, Patrick. I think it was a component of our experience of training in Iwama.
Yes.
But not necessarily the technical orientation.
No.
As beautiful as it was,
yeah,
it has its limitations.
Yeah. I think I don't know about you guys, but when I got to Iwama, I realized when I first arrived, I had that drive or that inclination towards looking for a spiritual understanding or spiritual insight from the beginning. And I recognized when I arrived in Iwama that the Aikido that was practiced there was not it. But I also recognized that somehow by practicing this the way it was being practiced in Iwama, it would give me the fundamental building blocks for moving forward along that direction. So I could sense I was in the right place at the right time, even though it wasn't looking like the way I thought it was going to look in terms of actually being spirituality in movement, or some form of recognition of oneness at the level of the body. And that definitely wasn't the case, but it felt like there was something inherently there, either through the echoes of what Osensei had left behind, or the fabric of the techniques itself, that contained within it the possibility for discovering that later on. And that's why I stayed. And that's, for me, that was really valuable and also very grounding to get into the body so deeply too.
You know, I think that there's this whole conversation in a way could be summed up in this beautiful Zen saying, and it points to something that all four of us and many of the people that I meet on the path of Aikido. Tony Sargent Sensei is here. Hey Tony, it's good to see you. I haven't seen Tony for years, but it's like we plug right back into that. And in Zen they say you swallow the whole fish, bones and all. You swallow the whole fish, and you spend the rest of your life spitting out the bones. Because the whole fish, there's an essential nourishment there. And in the bones, it's just like there's no nutrition whatsoever in the bones. But in Japan, each and every one of us, we took it on. We became Japanese. We took on all the forms that are not necessarily, Patrick, what did you say? Not necessarily that the essence that we were looking for, but they were, it was somehow embedded in there that through those forms and through that culture, certainly in the high level intensity training and really tremendous discipline that was required to be in Iwama, we came into contact with that essence individually. And we could see it, you know, Saito Sensei would spurt it through every now and then, this kind of universal nature of the principles of Aikido, but we took on everything. And that was a process. That was a process of growing. It was a process of, you know, blood, sweat, and tears and gaining a lot. But then it was necessary, and thank our lucky stars that certainly each of the four of us, we made the choice. We said, these bones are sticking in our system and they're not serving my further development. And in our own ways, we went through the process of spitting out the bones in our own life and our own teaching with our own students, but also with further teachers that we worked with along the path. And to this day, I'm still, there's some bones in there I'm still spitting out, but the essence, the essence of the fish, we swallowed it all the way. And there was something really beautiful about that. And maybe too much sometimes, not enough other times, but you know, it's there, it's in the system.
It's a nice metaphor because it inherently within that metaphor, you can feel the painful process of spitting out the bone.
Yeah,
And it's not something it's not something that happens. And I think the spitting out the bones, I mean, I've had to do it with teachers that followed afterwards as well. And it's just, that's the whole digestive process.
Right.
You can't just pick and choose. You can't just pick and choose what you want. You go fully in,
no.
And then
you
process the whole thing out. Yeah,
that's right. The ego, and not to say anything bad with the ego, but that's what the ego does. The ego has preferences. It picks and chooses what it wants, it doesn't want. But the path, a higher path of practice, demands that we swallow the whole fish. You cannot pick and choose. That's part and parcel of the path.
As much as we try.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go kicking and screaming down the path.
So Bjorn, you had a specific question you wanted to kind of follow up on. What was, you want to say that again?
I forgot. Remind me, please.
I think it was something about how our experience in Japan laid a foundation for
Further exploration.
Further exploration.
Right.
Yeah, because I came to Iwama. I had already been away from Sweden several years, or no, not several years, but a year and a half or more. So I had already kind of parted with my roots, and I had given myself the time to just leave, and without a return ticket. And so it was like a new learning experience from 1 month to another, and when I came to Iwama the last time, I had already met my spiritual teacher to be. I just met this American spiritual teacher that had completely blown my heart and my mind wide open. So I came to Iwama in well, actually, it wasn't the last time I came to Iwama. It was second to last. When I came to Iwama in 91, I had met this teacher of mine that was going to be my teacher. At the time when I came, after I met him, I didn't know that. But, and that was,
You were still nibbling the fish. Later, you swallowed the whole fish.
Well, this was the interesting part, because when I had been out traveling, because in one way, when I came to Iwama, I wasn't I wasn't into turning Japanese and learning all of that. I was too lazy for all of that. So, but I think there was an interest that I had carried with me that was part of leaving home, leaving my homeland, was that interest of wanting to figure things out, wanting to find out what life is about. And that was it was like a guiding question that stayed with me all the time. Where, what is the truth? What is the truth? What is the truth? And in Iwama, it was like, I love it here because I love the Aikido, and I love the Aikido that Saito Sensei were doing, because it's beautiful. It wasn't competitive. It wasn't contentious, though there was a lot of competition going on with the mats, with the strong guys. But when I saw the beauty of non-competitive Aikido, it was just gorgeous. And of course, from time to time, I would have this light bulbs going off when this would happen in practice. And you go, yes, that felt fantastic. Not because I managed to throw him beautifully in this very strong shionage, but because there was a relationship that opened up into unity. That was incredible. And that didn't happen when you had that competitive mindset. It happened when I released my defenses into something that was holistic. But that was just tastes of something to come. And so when I left Iwama, I had already I met my spiritual teacher, and then I spent a few more years in Iwama. But that was a transition point when my spiritual path became much more important than my Aikido path, even to the point where I was ready to put my Aikido to the side to pursue my spiritual path. And solely focus on what that is about. And what I learned the hard way, I think we all learned the hard way, it's about ego. It's about who is this guy standing in the way? And whether that be Aikido or whether that be in life, that is what anyone who's serious about the spiritual path will encounter. You encounter yourself, and you have to face it. And especially if you have a teacher who puts it in your face every day. But so, and that's an ongoing learning. That's an ongoing learning. But without that acknowledgement that there is something that is obstructive, that is standing in the way, that is conditioned, that is willful and spiteful, we can't pretend that we really have gone down the spiritual route. And that's what I see you guys, and also must mention Luis Bernaldo de Quiros as a big inspiration of mine when I was in Iwama as well. When I first came to Iwama from meeting my spiritual teacher, I had so much that had opened up, and Luis was one of the, with you, Patrick, Luis was one of the people that I could speak to, and he's like right there with me. And so it was a wonderful time to come and spend time in Iwama again, to then share these initial experiences and share this life that has now taken on a different gear. It just jumped into a different gear, and something else starts taking on. And I think that's where we moved into, that's when like life in Iwama was coming to an end, and it was time to move on. And I think the question, I don't know, does the question relate to that step, the next step?
What's the question?
I don't know.
I think if I could paraphrase, I don't know, there was because in what you're talking about, Bjorn, the sense of the spiritual path being about confronting and facing your own ego, I get that, but that to a certain extent demands a commitment that continues and is in my experience is never ending in many different aspects of of itself and facing shadow and all of these things. But somehow, in my experience in Japan, in Iwama, and I'd like to ask Alan and Miles about this as well, is that there was somehow, in coming to Japan and in practicing and committing to a life that I felt I was in love with, I started to create, or I started to connect with a source of inspiration that existed inside of me, a sense of being true to myself. And that, when that opened up and I was no longer dependent on a teacher for inspiration, I was no longer dependent on a place for inspiration, that I became kind of free to a certain degree, free to in the recognition that the inspiration, my relationship to life, was something that was fundamentally inherent in my own system. And Aikido and meditation, yoga, and traveling to all the different places that I went to, India and Nepal and Tibet and for Miles, Burma and Nepal and as well as for all of you guys, there was something of a switch where something had become independent in its own ability to find inspiration where I'm at, rather than feel like I'm away from the place I need to be in order to be inspired. That inspiration was always where I was at. Wherever I was, inspiration was here. And it was based on my relationship to the moment rather than on some idea. Whereas before, when I'd left California, it was like, okay, I need to go to Japan to get inspired. I need to go someplace else to be free or to do what I love to do. I need to go someplace else. And that took a while before it changed. And I realized, no, it's actually where I'm at all the time. And it's not anywhere other than here. I don't know if I'm only speaking obviously for myself, but I'm curious, does that resonate with you, Alan, or Miles, along those lines? I imagine it does, but I just would love to hear your perspective.
I think I certainly went to Iwama with some kind of, I think I called it the like Luke Skywalker kind of thing, go out and find somebody.
Darth Vader.
Yeah, well, not Darth Vader, yeah. But, I'm more the Yoda, like look for somebody who'll explain this whole thing to you and sort it out. And I think one of the things that was really great about Soto Sensei was, like that huge heart that he had, but the other end is just, he didn't, well, I mean, certainly at that time, he didn't pander to your need to make him a spiritual master, so to speak. So you very quickly, that's cut out. And I guess that was a good step for me from there on in dealing with things, is to make use of situations and people who can teach. But in the end, it's going to be what I do, and it is self-creative. If you want to get those things done, and you don't need to go to Japan for it, but it does. Sometimes you need certain experiences to move you along, I suppose. So, but those things are not going to do it for you. You have to do all of the work. So, and that's been the case. I mean, it's the same thing with time with Peter. It's still the work you've got to do. So,
but do you feel that what inspired you to make that choice to go to Japan is still living inside of you right now? It's still fundamentally driving the way you make decisions about your life?
I think so. I mean, it's very difficult to tell because, I'm a lot more mature. I have a lot more life experience than, I mean, that was a really naive kid. So
I mean, minus the fantasy, the inspiration to.
Yeah, I think the inspiration.
To take a risk.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the inspiration is there to, and I continue to live a life a little less ordinary. So,
yeah.
I think that feeling, it's I think it's softer and deeper than it was, I think is the thing. So, and more self-confident that, that you can grow. So, and at the same time, I mean, good teachers are always good teachers. So, It's the other side of it.
Miles, I remember meeting you in Iwama the first time you came to visit, I think. And it was a great connection. And but you know, we often talk about now living life on the edge, on our edge of our evolutionary edge or our developmental edge. And that's something that you're continuing to teach about. Was that something you felt was present in Iwama as well? Obviously, I think it does, but I've never asked you that.
I mean, it's always what drove my life, excuse me. It's always what drove my life. It's always what drove my life decisions, my key, what do you say, crucial decisions in life. But I would say that this kind of, what you're talking about, coming to the realization that I don't need permission, that in and of myself and my own expression of my perspective, I was always a very, very slow, gradual developer in that sense. I had early, like I spoke about this before, but I had early experiences of some type of a liberating awareness, and then would fall back into just slowly climbing up the mountain, like gradually, incrementally, step by step, day by day, month by month, year by year. And looking back, there were big steps that made a big difference in that. And certainly it was more while I was living in Iwama, because, you know, Japanese is very conformative. You're not really encouraged to, it's not an expressive country. It's not an expressive culture. It's a regulated, highly regulated culture, which is great because you can go deep within certain forms, but you're not really encouraged to be free in your own expression. Give yourself permission. You know, the nail that sticks up gets hammered down. That's the cultural rule. It was after when I left there, it was my first experience with Peter Ralston. Also, nothing to the extent of Alan, but I think I trained with him intensively for about 3 weeks. Huge. One of them was like a 10-day contemplative intensive. The other were his martial, he's a genius. And that liberated my Aikido, and not just my Aikido, but many parts of my life in ways that to this day, I have nothing but gratitude. Then I went back into Burma, which was more of a kind of a gradual, slow developmental process, which was all necessary. And then through those awakenings and realizations, coming to, I guess the biggest thing for me, Alan Patrick Bjorn, was how do I take what I have and offer it to the world? You know, that was one thing, and that by itself is a big thing. But then not just offer it to the world, but offer it to the modern, postmodern, evolving world context, cultural context that we find ourselves in on a daily basis. That, when those two things come together, this eternal, universal, timeless realization, whatever that is, meeting culture and life and individuals and psychologies and cultural psychologies and evolving and politics and everything else, meeting that kind of crazy relative world that we live in, when those two things come together, held in the right way, and this is really my whole life is kind of about this now, held in the right way, it creates that evolutionary tension. And how can we align? And the only way to do this is to give ourselves permission. How can we align in a way that actually gives voice and expression to what needs to evolve? I fundamentally see this path, like all paths, like all spiritual paths, Aikido is a path that has the potential to, and should, and could, and will, if we allow it, lead to wholeness. And wholeness, you know, conflict resolves into wholeness. It's a healing path. It's a spiritual path. And the way that Aikido meets the world, the way that my life meets the world right now, ups and downs for sure, but that's also kind of, that I'm completely aligned with.
Right.
And surrendered to that unfolding in a way.
Right. I'm kind of curious real quickly, you know, to all of you, in the past, I you know, looking at how Buddhism moved from India to China and China to Japan, and seeing that there were certain individuals like Bodhidharma who brought Buddhism to China, and Rinzai, and who helped bring it to Japan. Did you find yourself, or did you feel yourself as being something along that lineage of bringing a tradition, an ancient tradition, to another location, being somebody that was part of that migration of tradition to a new new territory, because to a certain extent I had that feeling specifically with Aikido, but also with meditation as a whole, a sense of like being part of that migration of bringing wisdom to a different kind of wisdom to another area.
Totally. Totally. I mean, the way I look at it, it's contextual. So it depends on the student. It depends on the place. And there's what the students want. There's what the culture context wants, and there's what it needs. And not that I understand the needs of everything in the world, but where I do have ability to see, I see, and I try to meet them where they're at, but also kind of give them what they need. So I might become very traditional. If somebody's young and they need that really strong disciplined context, I might offer that. If they grew up with that and they're stuck there, then I might offer something that's a little bit more freeing and liberating. It kind of depends on what I'm doing and who I'm with.
Sure. That's the skillful means. That's that translator's capacity. I don't know, Alan, Bjorn, does that make sense what I'm saying?
Well, personally, I didn't really come back. I didn't leave Japan with the purpose of coming back teaching. When I did come back, yes, I did open my dojo. I did open my dojo when coming back, but only for a short period, because then I gave that up because I was pursuing my spiritual path. And
you were called something greater.
Yes, that was because I was very new, and I had so much more to learn. So, and I knew I had to pursue it because I couldn't pull this off by myself. So I followed my heart and my teacher and the community, and I spent years in and out of a community circled around the teacher. And I did some Aikido on the side here and there, but for some time I put Aikido aside and just focus on the spiritual path. And of course, I felt now looking back, I was young and curious and interested, and everything was new. I didn't have much of an understanding of what spiritual work entailed or what it consisted of. So I just learned as I went along, and it's been taking many years to find myself where where it fits into the life that I want to live, and how it fits into my Aikido and the way I want to teach my Aikido. But I never came back to a vacuum because, I was growing up in Sweden where there was a lot of Aikido around. So Aikido wasn't really foreign to the circles I trained and moved in. There was like, and I was young guy, and there was generations of Aikidokas ahead of me, Swedes, Danes, Norwegians. So in one way, I didn't feel I need to bring anything. It was already there. Yes, and then, but much later on, and through the relationship with you guys, and also coming to see how I wanted my Aikido to develop into. And this has very much been rubbed up against you, Miles, and you, Patrick, and not so much you, Alan, because you're on the other side of the world, but that has been very much informed by my Iwama days, because the Aikido I appreciated as a kid, as me growing up in Sweden, and the Aikido I saw with Saito Sensei in Japan, was always the same Aikido that I always and still today enjoy. The non-competitive, the formative Aikido that works with uke-nage relationship to a deeper and deeper degree, and how that is played out in the dojo and how it is played out between student and teacher. But even today, even to this day, the spiritual pursuit, which is like you call, what do you call it, the inspiration, that spiritual impulse that has always been there from early age till now. I know it. Like you said, Alan, there's a confidence that is not a cocky confidence. It's not an arrogant confidence, but it's a confidence in experience of years and years of experience that you can isolate that impulse now. You know it, you can isolate it. And you can just take everything away from it. You can unclad everything, and what you're left with is this impulse, and that's it never leaves you. It's always there, and so it's very easy to come back to, because it's just there. So so I think that is maybe just a part of growing old. Maybe that's just part of time. I don't know. Of course, I can't really claim that I'm a good student or something. But where I wanted to draw this to, which I find is super important, because I think Patrick mentioned it earlier on, and this has that quality of when we are either approaching life and Aikido from a kind of I identity, individual identity, or like Patrick expressed it, I think as the we, as a holistic way of viewing the relationship, even to the point of being one. And that is we need a lot of time to just speak about that question in itself. But for me, these days, the communion aspect, the oneness aspect of Aikido, or life and relationships in general, has to do with that quality of engaging selflessly. And for me, that's everything. That's everything to come together in that.
Do you have a question there, Bjorn, or a direction you want to go?
Yeah, so I wanted just to ask you then, so how do you view the present work that you do today? And you said much about it, the present day and the presentation of your work, your teaching, how in the biggest possible way, in the biggest possible light, how does that reflect your deepest understanding?
It's a good question, because it kind of dovetails with something Gabor asked on the chat about what are the current fish that we're swallowing and what bones are we working on spitting out. My present, in terms of just to hit on Gabor's question, the current fish that I'm swallowing is not necessarily from a culture or from a teacher. I'm not beyond that for sure, but I'm in a different place in my life right now. And it's, I would say, more shadow work, like therapeutic, you know, what my own unresolved internal stuff that keeps coming back in life, doing deep shadow work process on that stuff is really kind of and the methodologies that I use would be the fish, and the insights that come out of that shadow work would be the bones that I'm spitting out. And it's even emotional just talking about it. So that's really, in a way, personally, my own personal, one part of my own personal leading edge. The other part is the creative expression in either teaching or creating content, or somehow creating ways that we can come together, like Bjorn did with this beautiful call, this beautiful series. For me, that's really the expression, because, and this comes right out of evolutionary enlightenment, I believe that the world is waking up, that we're all little nodes waking up, and what's calling, part of our work is actually to help others awaken in whatever way that is. But another part is to create the connections that we are not just awakened little nodes all over the world, but rather we are networked together. And that brings that somehow, I guess to sum it up, I feel somehow in service of a universal need for a collective consciousness in whatever way that's going. And the fundamental beautiful thing comes straight out of Aikido. The fundamental beautiful thing is that when we deeply connect with another, the system of that connection, when Miles's ego can get out of the way and the other person's ego, the system of that connection wants to move towards wholeness, and that movement is Aikido. that's what I'm passionate about these days.
I resonate with you completely, Miles. I think for me specifically, that within that context of recognizing that there's something about an evolutionary edge right now where we're needing to figure out how do we, as we're waking up to the realization that we are a systemic entity, that we live as a system, that the planet is fundamentally and our communities are fundamentally living as a complete system, and that we're interdependent in our capacity to thrive and our well-being, that my well-being is directly tied to the well-being of others, and that in order for us to be able to support that well-being, we have to realize a systemic perspective. Aikido directly pertains to how do I deal with conflict in a systemic relationship? How do I deal with conflict in such a way that I honor my own needs, but I also honor the needs of the relationship? How do I honor the system in such a way that I don't destroy the system as a way to protect myself, but I somehow honor the system as I navigate this conflict to a better place, which includes, of course, my own individuality, but it doesn't stop there. It goes beyond that to starting to realize that I want to honor the relationships that I'm in, and that relationship both just not just with you, but with the totality of the global community, because an Aikido contains within it that key, and that for me is extraordinarily inspiring.
Thank you. Alan, you want to have a final word?
I think about going north in New Zealand and growing organic bananas.
I remember, Alan.
That'll do me. It'll do me. I guess, you know, for me, for example, my Aikido practice and teaching is something that I really enjoy. And I know that people gain benefits from it in all sorts of different ways, and certainly from being in a community. And I think that's really something that I benefited from in Iwama. So if people can have that sort of experience, but I don't think I have a feeling that Aikido, I don't see it innately having this power for you know, a larger sort of change in the world, unless you set things up so that it heads that way. So I'm not questioning that it can't be.
Right.
Sure.
Right.
You know, so it's not a, you know, it's not of that nature, but it's simply that I don't think that's innate to Aikido, and I don't think I'm interested in bringing that to my practice.
Fair enough.
So yeah.
That's fine. I think, Alan, you're still the youngest guy on the block, but I just want to say though, but I think your presence as a teacher is probably doing much more good than you're probably ever aware of. But we are running short of time, so I want to thank you, Alan, Miles, and Patrick, and sorry for all your questions. We're going to keep the questions here. We have them here, so we can reply to them in writing. So stay tuned. We're recording this, and we're gonna. So this is going to be available to watch afterwards, and on each we have it around, and so we can reply to the questions at a later stage. So sorry for that, but we have less than a minute. So if you just, Miles, Patrick, Alan, if you want to say something to.
Thank you, Bjorn, for putting this together. It's been a total pleasure. And thanks for everybody for showing up.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've really enjoyed the time.
And
thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks a lot.
Unmute yourself and say bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.